Salvete, discípuli, soy el Tutorísimo, tu profesor favorito, y en este vídeo te voy a traer un nuevo tema de este curso, en este caso la unidad 2 o Unit 2, The French Revolution and the Spanish War of Independence. Y para ello, como siempre, nuestros materiales, la presentación que te voy a mostrar ahora y estos magníficos apuntes, que no es porque los haya hecho yo, sino porque son magníficos, que tenéis todo disponible, como siempre, en el aula virtual. Ya no sé ni qué estoy diciendo, así que vamos directamente a este vídeo y pasamos a hablar en el idioma de nuestros enemigos, del inglés. Venga. So this is the Unit 2, the French Revolution and the Spanish War of Independence. In this unit we are going to study first the American Revolution, second the most important part of the unit, the French Revolution, with the end of the revolution and the next stage, Napoleonic France, and finally some notes about the Spanish history on this time, with mostly the Spanish War of Independence. So let's start with the American Revolution. Well, in North America, in the eastern coast of North America, there were 13 colonies, this British territory since the 17th century, and these 13 colonies are going to revolt against their overlords, against the British. Why? Mainly because of several factors, such as ideological factors, for example, the Enlightenment ideas about freedom, the political factors, because the colonists didn't have any kind of representation in the British Parliament, and finally some economic and social factors, because as well as it would happen later in the French Revolution, there was a wealthy bourgeoisie that wanted freedom from the British, because when someone has the economic power, they also want the political power. So how did this revolution start? Well, George III, the King of England, increased taxes in several products in order to finance the wars he was involved into. And this tax on tea was the casus belli that started with the American Revolution in this historical event known as the Boston Tea Party in 1773. Here you can see a group of Indians. These are colonists disguised as English with these Indian costumes, and they threw this tea cargo from this ship in the Boston harbor. And from this, starting with this moment, the British government sent troops, and then a bit later the fight started. And there was a war, and at first the colonial army was defeated, but later the colonists started to gain some victories or to achieve some victories, and one of the most important events was the Declaration of Independence of the United States on July the 4th, 1776. Here is being signed. So they wanted they achieved political independence. This is the first time it happened in America since it was discovered. Well, the fight continued. Here you have a fragment of this Declaration of Independence. We are not going to read it, but if you are curious, you can read it on the internet, or you can pause this video. As I was saying, the fight continued with George Washington as the leader of the colonial army, and finally, with the help of the French and the Spanish, the Americans won the war and gained their independence. This is a fragment from the movie The Patriot by Mel Gibson. Amazing movie. If you want to see it, you can click on the link. So after the Battle of Yorktown in 1781, and the United States was recognized by Great Britain in 1783. Shortly after this, the United States Constitution was adopted, or at least was drafted in 1787, which established a federal republic with George Washington as its first president. It had popular sovereignty, separation of powers. As you can see here, the legislative branch and today is held by the Congress, which is composed of two cameras. the House of Representatives and the Senate. In the executive branch, the Americans have a president and a vice president, and in the judicial branch, the highest court is the Supreme, or the most important court is the Supreme Court. So all of these ideas and all of this separation of powers and this the right to vote and many other citizen rights, such as the Bill of Rights, which are the first 10 amendments, enmiendas, of the Constitution of the United States of America, which were introduced in 1791. All of this was the materialization of the ideas of the Enlightenment. And this is it for the first part of the unit, the American Revolution. Now, lo que mola, the French Revolution. First, as in many other historical events, we have to talk about the cases. No, not the cases, joder, no sé lo que digo. The causes, not the cases, of the French Revolution. Well, there are several. For example, the Enlightenment principles that we studied in the previous unit, or the example of the American Revolution we just talked about. And also there was some social and economic crisis. The social crisis because the third state, you remember, the commoners, they were carrying with all the effort, all the economic effort of the state, while the first state, the clergy, and the second state, the nobility, they were lazy, they were unproductive. And also within this, the bourgeoisie also, which is part of the commoners, they had money and they wanted the political power as the American bourgeoisie did. And they are going to get it, of course. Well, but the most important causes of the French Revolution, or at least the immediate causes, were economic causes. First, there was an economic crisis caused mostly because of, I don't know why this is in Spanish, but this is crops and prices in France in the previous year, in the decade before the revolution. As you can see here, and this is wrong because prices should be the pink line and crops should be the green line. So there was a significant series of poor harvests which led to a very important rise in the prices, like today with our government. So this generated a lot of discontent among the poorest people of France. Also, well, this is the flour war in France, which this was some disturbs because of the price of the flour, la harina. Then the other important phase of this economic crisis was the financial crisis, because the monarchy lacked money, because the budget was, I know it's in Spanish but I couldn't find it in English, the budget is negative. The crown was on deficit. As you can see, they are spending way more money than the ones that they are getting. So the expenditures are way higher than the incomes. This means deficit. And if you don't have money and you keep spending money, you are getting into a problem. So most of this debt, or most of this deficit, was caused because of the payment of the interest of the debt, the sustainability of the military, because France was involved in the 7 Years' War and in the American War of Independence, and finally a significant part of the budget was personal expenditures of the king and his court, which this got upset, or this was the main cause of the upset of the popular classes. And who was reigning at this time? The king was Louis XVI and his wife was Marie Antoinette. And in these fragments of the movie Marie Antoinette, you can acknowledge how luxury or the luxury that the king and the queen lived in Versailles. So as a result, or to solve this problem, the ministers of Louis XVI, particularly his economic minister Jacques Necker, proposed that the privileged states started to pay taxes. This means that the nobility and the clergy lost one of the main privileges they had. They refused, and they demanded that Louis XVI convene the States General. If you remember from the previous unit, the States General is the name that the Assembly of Representatives had in France. In this assembly, the representatives of the three states, the nobility, the clergy, and the third state, they were represented. And but this States General, the last time they met was almost 175 years before, as you can see here, in 1714. And to this States General, the people of France wrote a lot of this cahiers de doléances, which is a complaint notebook, we can translate it like that, in which they demanded a lot of improvements to their life. I don't know why Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Franklin are here, so we're just going to skip it. So the first stage of the revolution, qué calor hace, me voy a quitar la chaqueta, is the breakout of the revolution in 1789. So the States General finally met in Versailles in 1789, and these are here, as I said, here you have the representatives of the clergy, of the nobility, and of the third state, and here you have the king. This is another view: king, first state, second state, third state. Here is the point of view of the third state, and this is a video if you want to watch it. Not today. So one of the first thing the third state representative asked for is a change in the voting model, because the voting model of the States General was like this: one vote per state. So this is very easy. If you sum up these two votes, they are always going to defeat the vote of the third state. What was the model that the third state proposed? This one, a vote per delegate, a vote per capita. So each delegate would have one vote. Following this model, the third state would have the majority to impose their demands. So this change in the model was rejected, and eventually the third state representatives were locked down of the assembly. So they went to another pavilion, they met there, and they proclaimed them as the National Assembly. They named themselves the National Assembly. So they picked up the national sovereignty of France. And in this tennis court, or jeu de paume, they made an oath. This is why it is called the tennis court oath. They pledged to draft a constitution that reflected the will of the majority of the French people. So they will continue to meet every day until they have finished and approved a constitution for France. And this is the coat of arms of the National Assembly, and this upset a lot the king, which tried to dissolve the assembly by force, but this was not possible because the people of Paris supported the assembly. So finally, Louis XVI had to accept this National Assembly, and this was because of one of the most important shortly after one of the most important and most famous events of the French Revolution, which is the storming of the Bastille. The Bastille was this castle, this fortress inside or in the center of Paris, and this was known to be a prison, to be an important prison for political prisoners during the French monarchy, not during the Louis XVI reign, but mostly during the Louis XIV reign. Still, it had a lot of ammunition and weapons, so the people of Paris stormed it and managed to capture it. And after this, the revolution spread throughout all of France. which also in the countryside. In the countryside, these disturbs of these riots, including burning of the noble properties and some killing, was known as the Great Fear, el Gran Miedo. After all of these events, Louis XIV had had to accept the rule of the National Assembly and had to rule with the National Assembly. So a new stage in the French Revolution starts, which is known as the constitutional monarchy. So now we have the moderate bourgeoisie in power. They rule with the king, and while they were drafting the constitution, they are going to approve some revolutionary and some very interesting legislative work. The first one, and maybe the most important one, they abolished feudalism. Well, on this date, on the 4th of August, which means that all the ancient regime privileges were destroyed. So there was no estates anymore, and there was no manorial rents or tithes or whatever. So now every person was a citizen instead of a serf. Later, they approved the Declaration of Rights of Man and of the Citizens, and here they recognized a lot of rights and individual freedoms, and to sum up, the equality of all citizens before the law. Here you can read some of the articles, and here you have them in French. Then in 1791 they finally drew up a constitution, the Constitution of 1791, which was based on several enlightened ideas, such as the separation of powers. As you can see here, the executive power is always held by the king and its minister, and the king has the right to veto, so to stop the approval of any law. The legislative power is held by the National Assembly, and the judicial power in the courts. Only the male French citizens over 25 years of age who pay taxes can vote. This is called census suffrage. Census is a list of citizens. This means that the only ones who can vote, who can elect the National Assembly, are these voters, men over 25 years who pay taxes. And this is the census. Also, there was a new army, or a new army corps was created, the French National Guard. These were usually dressed up in blue, with blue uniforms, and they were loyal to the assembly. And they abolished the guilds also. They forced the nobility to pay taxes, and to solve the financial crisis, the church property was expropriated, and a civil constitution of the clergy was created. This means that all the Catholic priests, had to pledge loyalty to the state instead to do so to the Pope. Many of them refused, so they were killed. Unlucky. Finally, there was a new territorial organization. They destroyed all of these traditional noble territories. I don't know how to say. I can find the word in English. And here it says provinces, but it's not a provinces, and with lines the actual departments of the French Republic. Well, now we have a constitutional monarchy, and although it seems consolidated, there were a lot of conspiracies. For example, the royal family didn't want to accept, well, they were forced to accept these changes, but they didn't want to live in this constitutional monarchy, so they asked some absolute monarchies in Europe to help them to restore absolutism, mainly the Austrians here and the Prussians in the north. With this, there was, well, this is called the first coalition, but it is going to grow later. And while this was happening, there was an important episode that happened, which is an unsuccessful attempt of Louis XVI and his family to escape to the Austrian Low Countries, and this is called the Flight to Varins. Varins is it's a village more or less over here, where the royal family, Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, and their kids, they were captured because they were recognized by some soldiers, and they were seized and driven back to Paris. And since then, the king is going to retain the power, the executive power, but he is going to be treated like a prisoner in his palace, in the Tuileries Palace. So now we are in 1792, and a new stage is going to start, which is the Republic, or the period, besides the Republic, the period of the National Convention from 1792 to 1794. And this is going to happen because of these guys here, the sans-culottes, which mean they are not wearing a culotte, which is this cloth. They are wearing trousers. These were the poorest part of the population of Paris, the sans-culottes. And they are going to revolt against the monarchy, mostly because of the Austrian and Prussian invasion, and because of the unpopularity of Louis XVI after the successful attempt, this flight to Reims. They are going to storm the Tuileries Palace, which is this building here, which does not exist anymore, and they are going to kill all the Swiss Guard of the king, and finally they are going to arrest here's another video, King Louis XVI, and he's going to be now a real prisoner. After that, the Republic is going to be proclaimed on the 21st of September of 1792, and a new assembly is going to be elected by universal suffrage, called the National Convention. And these are the symbols of the first French Republic, and this is their motto: Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité. So, before going on, we have to be clear with the political groups of the revolution. We have two main groups, absolutists and patriots. The absolutists are the royalists, the one who support the absolute monarchy, mostly the royal family, of course, and the nobility and the clergy. Most of them have gone into exile, remember, after the storming of the Bastille and the Great Fear. Then we have the patriots. The patriots are the liberals, the one who wanted some reforms. First, with the National Assembly and the 1791 Constitution, the monarchists were in power, while the king was in charge of the executive power. But now, with the proclamation of the Republic, we are going to see their two main political parties are going to be the protagonists: the Girondists, which are the moderates, and the Jacobins, which are the radicals. The first year of the convention, from 1792 to 1793, the Girondists are going to be in power, and the last year the Jacobins are going to be the ones who are in charge. So here you have, this is the National Assembly with the distribution of these Jacobins and Girondins. In the middle we have the plain, which are center representatives. Sometimes they supported the Jacobins, sometimes the Girondins. So the first year the Girondin convention is going to be on top, and one of them, or the main thing they are going to do, is to judge Louis XVI. So remember, this is some kind of dictatorship, so they hold all the judicial powers, the National Assembly, well, in this case the National Convention. He's going to be heard on trial, and he's going to be found guilty of treason, so therefore executed. And he's going to be executed the 21st of January of 1793. Louis XVI here, Louis XVI here, in La Place de la Concorde. So, well, this is the best video of the year, the execution of Louis XVI. He is buried, well, or at least his cenotaph and his wife's is in the Saint Denis Abbey. And after this called the king's death caused a lot of fear and a lot of a very important shock in all of the European monarchies. So almost everybody in Europe declared war on France, and this is called the First Coalition. Remember, Austria and Prussia were already in war, but after this all of the German nations are going to be states. There are a lot of German states. The Holy Roman Empire is going to declare war on France. Also, most of the Italian states, Savoy, Naples, the Papal States, Spain, Portugal, Great Britain, the Low Countries, etc., etc. Almost everyone in Europe. And to face this war, the convention, now controlled by the Jacobins, is going to organize this massive levy. A levy is a forced conscription, so a recruitment of volunteers. So the convention is going to draft more than 1 million soldiers, which are going to help to win to this first coalition, because they won the war. This is amazing. But in the meantime, there's going to be also an internal revolt, which is called the La Vendée, or the Vendée. This is a monarchist and Catholic revolt in the region of La Vendée, which is this region here in orange, in the west of France. It's going to be terminated when the convention sent the army. So now we have the Jacobin Convention in charge in 1793. What are they going to do? Well, this is known as the extreme phase of the revolution. They are going to draft a new constitution, a very progressive constitution. They recognize popular sovereignty, because all the men aged 21 or more are going to be able to vote, and all that they are going to recognize a lot of rights. And with this constitution, there's going to be an executive council. Well, they did not come into force because there was no time, but the government is going to be led by an institution called the Committee of Public Safety, o Comité de Salud Pública, o de Salvación Pública, led by the Jacobin leader Maximilien de Robespierre, with also some other important Jacobin leaders like Georges Danton, which is going to be killed. And this period of the Jacobin Convention is going to be known as the Reign of Terror, el terror, le terreur. Why? Because freedoms, in order to preserve the revolution and the republic and to fight the war of the First Coalition, freedoms were suspended, and anyone who were opposing the government of the revolution could be imprisoned or even executed by the guillotine. Mostly because of this law of suspects. Here you have a fragment of it that says that almost anyone who is suspicious to conspire against the revolution can be detained, can be arrested. So Robespierre killed a lot of people, tens of thousands of people. They killed Brissot, which is the leader of the Girondins, and most of the Girondins. He killed, the convention killed Marie Antoinette, I can say that, the wife of Louis XVI, and many other nobles and people who was not supporting the revolution. This is a very interesting joke. Also, they enacted a series of laws which was to satisfy mostly sans-culottes, which they are called the social laws, such as they control the prices and the salaries. This is the law of the general maximum, which establishes a maximum price to some of these products, like food. They are going to distribute the assets of the counter-revolutionaries which were previously confiscated, such as the church lands, and education is going to become compulsory. Also, they did something like this, like they abolished slavery, and this period is going to last until 1794, and what happened there, or what was the last thing that upset all the opposition to the National Assembly? This festival of the Supreme Being. The Jacobins created this this kind of new religion. They abolish Christianity, but they created this, the worship of reason, which is a stupid thing. So, finally, the opposition to the Jacobins organized a coup d'état, un golpe de estado, and they tried to seize Robespierre on the 9th of Thermidor. This is a new French Republican calendar that was set up in the year of 1792, 2 years before. So after this coup, Robespierre and the most important Jacobin leaders are going to be seized and executed. So the time of the National Convention is going to come to an end. And the last episode, or last stage of the French Revolution started with the Directory from 1795 to 1799. With this, the moderate bourgeoisie took back the power. They drafted a new constitution, the 1795 Constitution, with an executive power which was held by 5 members, the 5 directors. This is why it's called the Directory, and a legislative power with 2 chambers, the chamber of the council, the council of the 500 and the council of the elder. These are the 5 directors which control all the power in France. And this regime, this directory, was very unstable and had to be because they had to fight a lot of conspiracies, and they still have to fight the war of the first coalition. So they had to use a lot the army. So the army became very powerful, the army became very important in the political life of the French, and this meant that many people in the army are going to become very famous, such as this guy here, Napoleon Bonaparte, which was an official who raised within the military ranks until he became general. He achieved a lot of victories. He was the one, for example, who ended with the war of the first coalition, but this means that he became very popular and very powerful. So after his successful campaigns in Italy and in Egypt, he made himself another coup, the coup of 18 Brumaire. This is another date of the French revolutionary calendar, which equivalent is November the 9th, 1799. With this coup, he seized power and ended with the French Revolution, starting a new regime. So, the legacy of the French Revolution, very, very fast. As you remember, I said that this 2.6 you don't have to study it, but very, very fast. What is the legacy of the French Revolution, or these revolutionary ideas, which we can sum up with this freedom, equality, and fraternity. All this new rational distribution of the territory, and some curiosities, for example, the international system, which is no longer in use, I think, but I'm not sure, among many others. So this is the summary of the French Revolution, and we begin with the rule of Napoleon Bonaparte, Napoleonic France. So Napoleonic France, which was this military officer, general, and now he's going to be consul, because the first stage of Napoleon's rule is the consulate between 1799 and 1804. So there was a new constitution, the Constitution of 1799, which established the consulate. The executive power was, well, almost all the power, because this was some kind of dictatorship, was held by 3 consuls, being Napoleon always the first consul and the most important one. During his rule, it was a dictatorship, it was a period of autocratic and authoritarian rule, but he wanted to end with all the instability that had been the protagonist since the beginning of the revolution. And he managed to do so, and he also introduced new reforms, such as the public education or the new code of laws, which is very important because it's going to be the example of the inspiration to the rest of the European codes during the 19th century. And also he signed an agreement with the church, which is called the Concordat. And finally, he became more and more powerful and famous and important, charismatic, so he finally named himself emperor in 1804 with a new constitution, but he was crowned by the Pope in 1804 and he started the conquest of Europe with his army, which was called in French La Grande Armée, which stands for the Great Army. And with this, he defeated almost every country in Europe: Russia, Austria, Naples, Holland, Prussia, and Warsaw. The most important victories for Napoleon was Austerlitz in 1805 versus the Austrians. This is why he built the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. Versus the Prussians in the Battle of Jena in 1806. This is Napoleon entering Berlin. And versus the Russian in Friedland in 1807. So after all of this conquest, the empire reached to its zenith in 1812. As you can see, the French or Napoleon annexed a lot of territories: Catalonia, half of Italy, some of the Dalmatian coast, all of the Low Countries, and even some portion of North Germany. And also he controlled all of these countries in Europe that you can see surrounded by this red line. Well, this could be because he had a ver si lo puedo decir, he had appointed some members of his family in the thrones of some European monarchies such as Spain, or because these, such as Prussia and Austria, they have been defeated, and Denmark defeated in the field. There were two countries that Napoleon could not control. First, the United Kingdom, because the French fleet was defeated in Trafalgar in 1805, and the Russians, which Napoleon is going to try to conquer in 1812. This is the Battle of Trafalgar that the British destroyed the French Navy. These are the brothers and sisters of Napoleon, which were appointed as kings in several monarchies in Europe, as well as some of his field marshals like Murat or Bernadotte. So the decline of Napoleon is going to start first in Spain with the uprising of el 2 de mayo de 1808 and the first defeat in open field of the Grand Armée in Bailén in 1808, but mostly because of the failed Russian campaign. Napoleon tried to invade Russia, and he crossed the border with, you can see here, with 422,000 soldiers. To Moscow, they only arrived, 100,000 soldiers arrived, and during his retreat, again to Central Europe, only 10,000 of the soldiers could come back. So this was a completely disaster, even though Napoleon won some battles such as Borodino, and he managed to arrive to Moscow, and he left it not before burning the Kremlin to the ashes. So the withdrawal was very hard because they had to fight the Russians, but they also had to fight with the cold of the winter. That is why many French soldiers died. So after that, the French army was very weak. Therefore, all of the countries, another coalition was formed, and they managed to defeat Napoleon in the Battle of Leipzig in 1814. This meant that Napoleon had to abdicate. He was exiled to the island of Elba in the western coast of Italy, and Louis XVIII, the smallest brother of Louis XVI, came to the throne. Here, this is sad Napoleon, pobrecito, going to exile. But many people still supported Napoleon in France, so he managed to escape and come back to France the year after in 1815. This is called the 100 Days, o los 100 días de Napoleón. Louis XVIII had to flee, he seized power again, and he called his army once again. He went to invade the Low Countries where the British and the Prussian army were established, and here we have the last battle of Napoleon, the Battle of Waterloo, the last defeat of the French army, well, or at least the Napoleonic army. After that, Napoleon was exiled this time to Saint Helena, which is an island in the middle of the Atlantic between Africa and South America. And there he was a prisoner of the British until he died in 1821. Several decades later, his bones were brought back to France, and now he rests in the Les Invalides in Paris. This is the summary, and finally some notes on the Spanish War of Independence. Well, first, when the French Revolution breaks out, Carlos IV is reigning. This is Carlos IV with Fernando VII and some of his family, María Luisa de Parma, etc., etc. But the real person, the real guy who rules is this, Manuel Godoy. He's Valido. Remember, Valido is a member of the nobility that holds power in the name of the king. So, first, when the French Revolution started, well, Spain closed its borders, they ended with the enlightened reforms, and we declared war on France after the execution of Louis XVI. This is called in Spain La Guerra del Rosellón or La Guerra de la Convención. We started invading France, but later, after the massive levy of the Convention, most of the Basque Country and Catalonia was occupied, so we had to sign the peace. The peace is called the Peace of Basel in 1795. After this, we became allies with the French. Way later, with Napoleon in 1807, Godoy allied to Napoleon, and also he signed the Treaty of Fontainebleau in 1807, which means that they came to an agreement. They will invade Portugal because Portugal didn't want to support the continental blockade that Napoleon had established after the defeat of Trafalgar. So this will allow the entering of French troops in Spanish territory in order to invade Portugal. But instead of that, instead of going to Portugal, many of them went to the main cities. So this is somehow a covert invasion. And this led to the El Motín de Aranjuez in 1808, where a popular uprising against Manuel Godoy was incited by Fernando VII, and because of this, Carlos IV had to depose Godoy and had to abdicate in favor of his son Fernando, which became Fernando VII. But after this, Napoleon, who was aware of this is Fernando VII, muy guapo él, Napoleon, which was aware of the weakness of the Spanish monarchy, he forced both Carlos and Fernando to come to Bayonne in France, where he managed to get them both to abdicate. First, Carlos IV abdicated in Fernando VII abdicated in his father Carlos IV. Later, Carlos IV ceded the Spanish crown to Napoleon, and later Napoleon gave the Spanish crown to his brother José Bonaparte. So now, the reign of José I Bonaparte started. He ruled between 1808 and 1813, when the last of the French troops were expelled. During his reign, he introduced the Bayonne Statute, which is a kind of constitution that is written by the king with some reformations, but still very conservative. And after this, for example, this is a new territorial division, which is very rational, by the way. And also, they were the people who supported José, they were called afrancesados. The people who supported Fernando were called fernandinos or patriotas. And finally, the Spanish War of Independence is going to come up after the popular uprising in Madrid on el 2 de mayo de 1808. And this extended to the rest of Spain with del bando de los alcaldes de Móstoles, está Manuela Malasaña. I don't know why I'm telling this in English. And this is la defensa del Parque de Monteleón con Daoiz y Velarde en la Plaza del 2 de Mayo de Madrid. The day after, they were shot, many of the rebels, and este es el bando, los alcaldes de Móstoles, que esto no tiene sentido que lo explique en inglés. De verdad, que se le ocurre el bilingüismo en la Comunidad de Madrid para matarlo. En cualquier caso, aquí tenéis, este es el bando de los alcaldes de Móstoles que llamaba a la insurrección contra los franceses y que fue extendido por toda España. So, these are, well, we were to English, qué remedio. These are the first stage of the war, the French campaigns in Spain. The French almost conquered, mostly after Napoleon's coming to Spain, because he had to come to Spain after Bailén. He conquered almost all of the peninsula except the area of Cádiz, where the courts were hidden. And but after that, after 1812 and the defeat of Napoleon's troops in Russia, we had the help of the British army who landed in Portugal, del Duque de Wellington, and the French were defeated in several battles, such as Arapiles, such as Vitoria, or such as... first Bailén, este es Agustina de Aragón, which defended Zaragoza en los sitios de Zaragoza, and we were also using the guerrilla warfare, o la guerra de guerrillas, pues siendo uno de los más famosos, Juan Martín el Empecinado. So, later, the French retreated, and the last victory was the Battle of San Marcial in 1813, here you have. After that, we invaded French territory, and Napoleon was forced to sign the Treaty of Valenciennes in 1813, so he recognized Fernando VII and withdrew his troops from Spain. Finally, the Cádiz Cortes and the Constitution of 1812. The courts, the Fernandinos, after the 2 de Mayo, they created juntas provinciales de defensa to command the war, because Fernando VII was a prisoner, entre comillas, in France. After that, these juntas, o la Junta Suprema de Defensa luego, they called the Cortes in Cádiz in 1812. They were elected by universal male suffrage, and they were controlled by the liberals. The liberals set new laws, such as press freedom, and they abolished the guilds, but the Inquisition. But the most important thing was the promulgation of the draft of the Constitution of 1812, La Pepa, which is the first one in Spain. They recognize individual rights, the equality before the law, and national sovereignty and separation of powers. So this constitution ended with absolutism in Spain. This constitution is not going to be accepted by Fernando VII when he comes back from France, but this is part of the next unit, and we can finish with this, the charge in... Esto es Ciudad Rodrigo, no sé qué batalla es. Well, the end. Lo dicho, vaya truño tener que dar la historia de España en inglés, pero bueno, por imperativo legal estoy haciendo esto. Esto luego dentro de unos años lo miraré y diré, pero ¿esto qué es? En cualquier caso, espero que os haya servido para comprender algunas cosas. Ya sabéis, cualquier tipo de duda por los canales habituales de comunicación, que algunos os dejo aquí abajo. No olvidéis de suscribiros y darle a like, y nos vemos en el próximo. Zagales, adiós.